Michael Turner never expected that one ordinary evening would flip his quiet world upside down. Yet it happened in the kind of moment people don't see coming, quick, sudden, and born from the kind of loneliness that sits deep in your chest until a single unexpected encounter shakes it awake. For years, Michael had lived inside a routine that looked perfectly fine from the outside. Steady job, stable life, clean apartment in the middle of Seattle. But inside, he carried a silence that followed him everywhere he went. Not a peaceful silence, but the heavy kind. The kind that reminded him every night that he had built a life with no one to share it with. After losing his father and seeing his closest friends move to different states, he had quietly stopped expecting anything new. People said time healed everything. But for Michael, time just made the rooms feel emptier. And on that rainy night, as he sat in the small cafe beneath his apartment, he felt that emptiness more sharply than ever. The rain hit the windows like impatient knocks, as if the world outside wanted to remind him he was still here, still waiting for something he couldn't name. He stared at his cooling coffee and thought, with a tired honesty he rarely allowed himself, I wish someone would walk into my life. Just once. Someone who makes me feel something again. He didn't know why he whispered that wish, but he did. And the strangest part wasn't that he said it was how quickly the world answered. Exactly 5 minutes later. The cafe door swung open with a rush of cold air and rain mist. Michael looked up and the sight stopped him. A woman stepped inside, shaking water from her dark coat, her hair slightly messy from the wind. She looked like someone carrying her own storms. Someone who had been strong for too long and finally needed a quiet corner to breathe. Her face held the kind of tired beauty born from real life, not perfection. She wasn't dramatic or showy. She was real in a way that made her presence feel grounding. Later, he would learn her name, Mum Carter, a middle school English teacher from Vancouver who had come to Seattle for a short break after a difficult year. But in that moment, he only knew that something in him reacted. A spark he thought had burned out years ago. And he didn't understand why. Emma walked toward the counter, trying to brush away her own frustration with a small, polite smile. She ordered a pastry, only for the barista to apologize. They had just sold the last one. She laughed softly, almost embarrassed, a quiet, warm sound that made something shift inside Michael. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're trying to stay positive even when life keeps throwing small stones at them. Without thinking, he stood up, holding the pastry he had just bought but hadn't touched. I think this was yours, he said gently, placing it on the counter beside her. She blinked, surprised, then looked at him with a pair of eyes that were tired but kind. Are you sure? She asked. He nodded. I'd feel bad eating it knowing you wanted it more. Her smile spread slowly, like she wasn't used to strangers being thoughtful. Thank you, she said, and her voice held a softness that made him feel strangely seen. They ended up sharing a table. What started as a small act of kindness stretched into a long conversation neither of them planned. The cafe grew quieter around them as the night deepened, but their conversation felt easy. Like they had known each other longer than just a few minutes. Emma talked about teaching, how she loved her students but sometimes carried their stories home with her, especially the ones who struggled in ways she couldn't fix. She talked about her love for old bookstores, her habit of collecting notebooks she never wrote in, and the way she talked to plants when she felt stressed. Michael found himself laughing, not at her, but because she made the room feel warmer. He told her about his job doing technical work for a software company, about how he lived alone, and how he had drifted into a life of quiet routines he wasn't sure how to break anymore. She listened the way few people ever had, fully, with both attention and curiosity. There was no forced charm between them, no exaggerated flirting. Just two adults, both slightly worn down by life, finding something calm and comforting in each other's presence. The connection wasn't fast or fiery, it was natural. Like two puzzle pieces that had been waiting in separate boxes for years but finally ended up on the same table. Michael didn't want the conversation to end, but he also tried not to show that. He wasn't the type to reveal his emotions quickly, especially not to someone he had known for less than an hour. Still, every time Emma smiled, something in his chest tightened, not painfully, but with a strange sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. He began to notice small things about Hertha: way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, the way her eyes softened whenever she talked about her students, the way she held her cup with both hands when she was unsure of what to say next. These small details made her feel real, grounded, human. Someone who carried both strength and exhaustion in equal measure. But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her expression shifted. She didn't look scared or angry, just suddenly pulled away as if the world outside had reached in and caught her by the sleeve. She placed her cup down slowly. I should go," she said quietly. The air between them changed instantly. Michael felt the warmth they had created slip just out of reach. He didn't want to ask why. Something about the way she spoke told him not to. Instead, he watched her stand, collect her coat, and hesitate. Her eyes met his one last time, full of something he couldn't read: regret, maybe, or longing, or fear of ruining a moment that didn't feel ready for answers. "I'm really glad I met you," she whispered. It was soft, honest, and final. Before he could respond, she turned and walked out into the rainy night. Disappearing into the blur of streetlights and falling water, Michael remained at the table long after she left. The pastry she had eaten half of still sat between them, and her empty cup left a small ring of heat on the wood. That small detail hit him unexpectedly hard. He didn't feel lonely because he was alone. He felt lonely because for the first time in years, someone had made him feel present, connected, alive. And she was already gone. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was nothing more than a brief encounter, a stranger passing through, a moment he shouldn't give too much meaning to. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't forget her. People didn't forget moments that woke them up after years of quiet later that night. Back in his apartment, he replayed their conversation in his mind, not in a romantic way, but in a searching way, like he was trying to understand what had shifted inside him. He didn't know why her leaving stung more than it should have. He didn't know why he kept checking the window, hoping to see her walking past the cafe again. He didn't know why her smile felt like something he had been missing without realizing it. All he knew was that something unfinished hung in the air, like a chapter that had opened but hadn't been given a chance to continue. He fell asleep with the sound of rain against the glass, thinking about a woman he had known for only a few hours but somehow couldn't stop thinking about. He didn't know that the story wasn't over. He didn't know that this wasn't random. He didn't know that she hadn't crossed his path for the last time. Life doesn't always bring people together just to separate them. Sometimes it pauses their story just long enough to make the next moment matter even more. Michael Turner never expected the next day to feel heavier than the last, yet it did. In a way that made every familiar street corner seem unusually gray and every cup of coffee taste sharper than it had before. He had walked to the cafe out of routine, the same small place where the night before had changed something deep inside him, though he didn't yet understand how. The memory of her smile, the way she had laughed when the barista apologized for running out of pastries, the soft way she had carried herself, everything from last night replayed in his mind, relentless and vivid. He had told himself she was just a visitor, someone passing through, someone he might never see again. But something about that impossible thought made the day stretch longer, made each minute feel like it carried a weight he couldn't quite shake. Even his apartment felt strange, too quiet, like the walls themselves were waiting for her to return. He walked briskly, as if speed could close the gap between them, as if arriving at the cafe first would somehow guarantee he would see her again. When he pushed open the door, he froze. His chest tightened and his pulse quickened in a way that reminded him he was alive. There she was, Emma Carter, standing just a few feet away, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup, hair damp from the drizzle that still lingered outside. Her eyes were scanning the room, searching, and when they met his, it was like the air between them sparked, heavy with the unspoken. He could see the faint relief in her expression, the soft exhale that came as if she had been holding her breath without knowing it. She smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that carried the warmth of sunrise breaking through a long winter. Michael's lips lifted almost involuntarily. "You're here," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, though it was impossible. Emma's eyes softened. I didn't know if I'd find you here again," she admitted, a hint of nervousness in her voice. She moved toward him slowly, as if she needed reassurance from the moment itself. "I hoped," she added quietly, "I hoped you'd still be here." Michael felt his throat tighten. Not from words, but from a recognition that this was real. This second chance that neither of them had expected. And yet, it felt inevitable. "I could say the same thing," he replied, trying to sound casual, though his heart raced. And in that instant, everything that had been left unfinished the night before, the brief laughter, the warmth of her presence, the ease of connection resumed. As if the universe itself had pressed play. They sat together at the same table. The one near the window, where the light of the afternoon spilled softly across their faces. The cafe hummed around them, but they were in a bubble, insulated by the quiet understanding that some things didn't need to be rushed. Conversation flowed naturally. Emma talked about the streets she had walked in Seattle the night before. The little shops that reminded her of Vancouver. The way the city felt familiar but strange at the same time. Michael spoke about the quiet routines that filled his life, the small comforts he had come to depend on, and the absence he hadn't realized he felt until she walked in. They laughed about little things. Like the barista's clumsy attempt to juggle coffee cups, or the way the wind had tangled her hair. But beneath the light-hearted chatter was a shared understanding of unspoken loneliness. Each word built a bridge between them, small and subtle, but solid. For Michael, watching her talk, seeing her eyes light up when she mentioned a favorite book or a cherished memory, he felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because someone finally had entered his life in a way that mattered. Someone who saw him without needing him to perform or impress. Apprehension because he didn't know what this meant or how it could last. Emma, on the other hand, had her own fears. She had come to Seattle needing space from her life back home, needing time to heal from a breakup that had left her cautious. She had not planned to let anyone in so quickly. Yet here she was, sitting across from a man whose calm presence made the city feel less heavy. His laughter and attentiveness reminded her that not all connections hurt. She found herself relaxing, letting the tension of travel and past heartaches slip away. Just enough to allow herself to exist in the moment without fear. Hours passed without either noticing. The rain outside slowed to a mist, and sunlight began to break through the clouds, casting warm reflections on the wet streets. Michael and Emma talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that feels ordinary, yet extraordinary because it arrives at exactly the right moment. Michael found himself noticing the small gestures that made her human. The way she wrapped her hands around the cup when she felt shy. The subtle tilts of her head when she was listening intently. The pauses that hinted at thoughtfulness and caution. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he wanted to solve. He didn't know it yet, but he was beginning to care in a way that scared him with its suddenness. A feeling he hadn't expected to encounter again as the afternoon deepened into evening. The conversation shifted, naturally, toward their pasts. Emma spoke carefully, not to burden, but to share what shaped her. She admitted how the breakup had left her wary. How she had come to Seattle hoping for distance from the pain, not realizing that connection could find her even here. Michael listened, not offering advice or platitudes, but simply hearing her story, nodding, responding with empathy. He realized that this honesty, this vulnerability shared across a cafe table, was rare, maybe even rare enough to change him. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet unfolding of two people willing to be present. Michael, in turn, shared his own experiences, the silent moments he had carried alone, the workdays that ended with quiet dinners and empty streets. He didn't embellish or hide. He simply let himself be known. And Emma responded with gentle attentiveness, the kind that makes someone feel not judged but understood. Time moved forward almost unnoticed. And soon the day began to close. Emma glanced at her phone, and Michael could see a moment of hesitation cross her face. She didn't reach for it immediately. She didn't want to leave the conversation just yet. Instead, she met his gaze, and there was a quiet acknowledgement in that look. A silent question that Michael instinctively understood. "Michael," she said softly, almost afraid to speak too loudly, "can we meet again tomorrow?" There was a vulnerability in her voice that made his heart tighten. "I don't want this to end." He felt the same, and his answer was immediate, calm and firm. "Neither do I." They rose together, collecting their coats and belongings, and Michael walked with her toward the door. The world outside looked different now, washed in the soft gold of fading sunlight, the rain leaving behind a clean, fresh scent. They stepped into the street, not hurrying, letting the moment stretch, savoring it. Michael realized how rare this feeling was. The sense that someone entering your life could naturally fit into the empty spaces you didn't realize were waiting for them. Emma felt it too, a quiet warmth that made her chest lighter, a relief she hadn't known she needed. They walked together, slowly, talking about where they might meet next, about books, movies, little favorite things, laughter spilling softly between them. There was no grand gesture, no forced drama, just the honest, gentle recognition that they had found something worth pursuing by the time they parted ways for the evening. It was already clear that life had changed. Michael returned to his apartment, not feeling lonely, but alive. Emma returned to her hotel feeling lighter, unburdened, a flicker of hope in her chest she hadn't felt in months. Both carried the memory of the other with them, a quiet, thrilling anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't forced it. Yet the connection that had begun the night before had deepened, grown into something that mattered. Each of them understood that this wasn't just a fleeting encounter. It was the start of a story neither could ignore. A story that would unfold one day, one conversation, one shared moment at a time. As Michael closed the window to his apartment that night, the city lights shimmering in the distance, he reflected on the strange, wonderful unpredictability of life. He had been lonely, sure, but loneliness had not prepared him for this sudden, quiet joy. Emma had walked in, and with her presence, she had shifted his world. She had reminded him what it felt like to be noticed, to be valued, to connect without expectation. And in doing so, she had also reminded him that life could still surprise, could still bring moments of genuine connection, even when all seemed lost to routine and silence. He didn't know what the next day would bring. He didn't know if the connection would grow or face challenges. But he understood one undeniable truth. He was no longer lonely. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready to hope, ready to see life as something more than survival. He had met someone who made the ordinary extraordinary, someone who made the world brighter simply by existing in it. Michael knew that this encounter, the walk-in he never expected, wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was the beginning of a journey, one that promised laughter, understanding, and the possibility of love, slow and steady, real and lasting. And as he turned off the lights and settled into his quiet apartment, he smiled softly, knowing that tomorrow held another chance to continue a story that had started with nothing more than a wish, and a single unexpected walk-in that changed everything.